Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The Chair wants to announce that I will be enforcing the 5-minute clock, but the Secretary got extra time because he followed the Chairman, the Ranking Member, and has green on today. So for those of you that don't, I will be much tougher on the clock. Let me start with an area that I mentioned and I know that you're focused on, and talk to you a little bit about the skills gap. As I mentioned in my comments and you reflected in your own, we've got a lot of job openings out there, which I think is very good news for the American people. But our labor participation rate remains low, and there are simply too many workers looking for work that have dropped out of the workforce, and employers are having a tough time finding the workers that have the skills that they need. The skills gap is a bipartisan concern on this committee. I've heard it mentioned by members on both sides. I particularly hear it when I talk to employers in my own district. They've got jobs. They want to be able to hire people. They're having a tough time finding folks that have the skills they need. Can you quickly detail what you're doing at the Department of Labor to address the skills gap, and why we haven't seen more results, why we keep having this persistent problem? Because we have spent a considerable amount of money over the years on a bipartisan basis to try and train up the workforce to get them ready for different jobs as they emerge.
Thank you for your question, and we've spent a lot of time on this, and I'm actually very proud of the work that we have done, and and the we in that sentence is everyone in this room and in this administration. On the issue of labor force participation, the good news about the decline in the unemployment rate is that over the last year, for instance, the labor force participation rate has been essentially flat. So that sometimes the unemployment rate goes down for a bad reason, sometimes it goes down for a good reason. When you have basically flat labor force participation over the last year, the primary reason we have seen the reduction in unemployment is because more people got jobs. And a substantial percentage of those were long-term unemployed. Our long-term unemployment rate is still too high, and we still have work to do. And we've had an all-hands-on-deck approach to this. The 5 million jobs, even in the depths of the Great Recession, in any given month, you had roughly 2 million job openings. In the churn of a 140 million person economy in terms of jobs, you will always have some job openings at one point or another. But your point is absolutely spot on in the sense that everywhere I go, it's Groundhog Day. I have the same conversation, and it's a good one. I want to grow my business. I hear from business owners. I'm bullish about the future, and one of my biggest challenges is how do we build a skilled workforce? And that's what WIOA is doing, is we are taking partnerships to scale. And we have a number of different agencies that have training dollars, and we have imploded stovepipes. We've created a skills cabinet. I have the privilege of chairing it. I'll be traveling later this week with Tom Vilsack to Georgia. We're working together to get SNAP recipients pathways to in-demand jobs so that they can get off of food stamps by having a good job with a career pathway. So we've been imploding stovepipes that way. Our investments in apprenticeship are another example. Apprenticeship is something that, as a nation, we've regrettably devalued over decades. I go to Germany. It's not a surprise that their youth unemployment rate is less than half of ours, because apprenticeship is something that has stature. It's a proven pathway to the middle class, and we have a $100 million competitive grant proposal that's designed to lift apprenticeship right now. And not only in the skilled trades, but it has application in IT, in healthcare, in cybersecurity, in logistics. There's a UPS training facility 15 miles from here that does great training for apprentices working at UPS. Of the 5 million job openings right now, 500,000 are in IT. And so we announced a tech hire initiative last week, and we're putting $100 million in a competitive grant proposal helping people to upskill. And so when I talk about Match.com, a big part of what we're doing, for instance, in the manufacturing context, through these manufacturing hubs that started in Youngstown, have had support on a bipartisan fashion, is we're taking those folks who used to work at the Bethlehem Steel plant, who have lost their jobs, and we're retooling them and putting them to work in advanced manufacturing in places across this country. And it's very exciting to get out there. The challenge moving forward, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me, is to sustain the momentum of TACT. So we had 4 rounds of half a $1 billion a year, and I can take you to communities across this country where they've built pipelines to healthcare jobs. They've built pipelines to IT jobs. And what we need to do is sustain and scale that momentum. We know what works. Partnership works. Building what I call that skills superhighway, where you have on-ramps for apprenticeship, where you have on-ramps for veterans, where you have on-ramps for people with disabilities, where you are redefining, as we've done through our grant making in partnership with the Department of Education. We are creating 6-year high schools where people come into those schools. They have a partnership with, for instance, in Chicago, a partnership with IBM. And these kids have mentoring opportunities and externship opportunities, and they leave with either a 2-year degree, or some leave after high school, and they're going to 4-year college because they're dreaming big. And so the key moving forward, I think we know the ingredients of success, and we're going to keep moving.
Secretary, don't push the green tie too far.
Yeah.
You've exhausted
I get really excited about this because there's a lot of stuff going on. I apologize.
That, but no, you don't have to apologize, but I will have other questions, so
sure.
if we can scale it down a little bit, that would be helpful to me. But let me move now to my ranking member, the distinguished lady from Connecticut. Thank you very much. I'm going to cover a couple things quickly. Sure. As you noticed, there's quite a deal of interest in H-2B visas. I'm not going to ask you to revisit your testimony, which I think is clear. I would ask you, we learned about the legal decision to stay that you had gotten, or excuse me, were requesting through the Department of Homeland Security. So given the interest on this community, I would just ask you to keep us abreast as you move down the line trying to address it. We've got considerable bipartisan interest in resolving this, which I know you're trying to do.
I will absolutely do that, and we'll keep you posted on a regular basis.
I appreciate that very much, Mr. Secretary. I also want to touch on something the Chairman mentioned in passing. For your fiscal year 2016 budget, you provided some detail about several proposed mandatory programs. Those are obviously beyond the jurisdiction of this particular committee, but I am curious, have you actually submitted authorizing legislation to the committees of jurisdiction for that at this point?
I'm not sure if we've gotten that together yet. We've been working with some folks on some aspects of that, but I don't know that it's been translated into bill language.
Okay, if you do that, again, we would request to be involved, because actually what happens there obviously reflects back on our own budget.
You have been very, very inclusive, and I want to make sure that we are always respectful of your interest and role. I
appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. One other area, and again, this touches a little bit on something that the chairman of the full committee brought up. You have a very robust increase requested, and the debate over the merits of that aside, you know, our challenge here is obviously our allocation is likely to be a lot lower than your request. Your request is appropriately based on the President's budget. That's what you ought to be doing, but frankly, that budget is not likely to become law. The Republican budget that's going to be rolled out today is not likely to become law. They're both competing plans, and there probably have to be some negotiation down the road. But in the interim, we're probably forced to appropriate to BCA levels, and absent a larger deal at a level above our own. So given that, what would be your most important priorities if we were stuck in a sort of flatline situation as we're working through the appropriations process?
Well, it's somewhat akin to asking you what your favorite child is.
That's exactly right.
You know, what I would say is, as the father of 3, I love all my children, and I love them equally. And similarly, you know, we've talked a lot about effective workforce development that gets folks back to work. We've talked a lot about the need to have robust enforcement of worker and retiree protection laws. We administer benefit programs, and I meet people. You know, the Navy Yard tragedy of a year and a half ago, we processed those claims lickety-split to give dignity to a family who had to confront the unimaginable. And you know, our BLS and other data sources, they enable us to do so much work as a nation, not just in government, but in the private sector. And so, you know, these are all important things, and that's why, you know, frankly, the sequestration caps are unrealistic. We were able to serve less people who needed jobs last year as a result of some of the caps, and that's unfortunate. And I know you've recognized that in the past, so I appreciate that.
Again, Mr. Secretary, I do recognize that, although I always like to point out sequestration was, passed by Congress, signed by the President, was actually
Absolutely.
a proposal of the President. That's to a degree it's worked in the sense that it's lowered the budget deficit, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, I would rather address some of the mandatory problems. My friend would probably rather address some of the revenue problems. But in any event, there's got to be some sort of discussion at some point, and it makes the budgeting exercise very difficult. I won't press you to choose between your children, although I actually got Secretary Duncan to choose his favorite child, and he likes early childhood development a lot. But Secretary Burwell was equally adept at not choosing between her children. You guys might straighten this line out. I will say this: we're going to have this discussion at some level in some way going forward.
Yeah.
And I say that with all due respect because I care a lot, given your expertise and your department's expertise, about what you think really is the most important set of things. We're not likely to have, what we would all like to have when we're making some of these decisions. So in the course of our discussions, I hope I'm able to discern the things that you really do think make the most difference, particularly in terms of helping people get to a job that I know we all want them to have. And I'll give you a chance to answer that because I don't want to shut you off with a red light since I've chastised everybody else for doing that.
No, I
Okay,
look forward to
very
working
good. I'll move to my
you.
friend, the distinguished lady from Connecticut. Just so you know, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to have just one question. The gentlelady from Connecticut is going to have one, and we'll mercifully let you go.
No, that's fine.
The question that I have, really, you have a very robust request, 677% increase for funding for IT modernization. And I'd like you to run through the justification for that. I know you're dealing with a lot of legacy systems. I know you're trying to make a great change. What sort of efficiencies would you see? Again, that is a very robust increase in a tight budget.
I don't disagree with you that it's a robust increase. Our Deputy Secretary was in New York recently, and we both go out and we visit our staffs. And he sent me he was with the OSHA staff. He sent me a photograph of their technology that they use out in the field. The technology consisted of a flip-top phone. I hadn't seen one of those in about 20 years. And we're only as productive as our IT. We had external audits that were done to see, how do we fare vis-a-vis the rest of the government. We are not faring well in terms of our IT capacity, and information is power. When you are an investigator out on the street, I've seen other agencies, and I've helped do this in other agencies where you can basically type in all of your data. You have to take a photograph of something. You can take a photograph, and now it's on your iPad or whatever device you have, and you don't then have to go back to the office, take what you had on a 8.5 by 11 and write it in. So you do more cases that way. I want to skip the 90s and skip the first decade of the 2000s and then try and maybe jump from the 80s to 2014. And it's really about, when I think about what we're doing, this is one of the biggest barriers as a department to our being what we need to be and what I think we both would want the department to be.
I won't ask you if it's your favorite child, but I will tell you it's a very expensive child. So with that, I yield to my friend from Connecticut with the final question of the hearing.